So let's go ahead and start this off. And Chromium, we'll be going to talk a little bit about Chromium-6. We're going to talk about the fact that there's a new regulation. We're going to look at compliance options and costs. And most importantly, we're going to get some feedback from our customers. We're interested in hearing your input on this, the things that we're going to talk about today. Chromium is an element, and it's one of the most common elements in our Earth's crust. And the sediments in the Earth have different types of sediments, have different amounts of chromium. It's the 9th most abundant one in our Earth's crust. It occurs usually as either chromium-3 or chromium-6. The 3 and 6 refer to the ionic state. It's just how many electrons are floating around the atom. And it can change from one form to the other instantaneously, depending on what type of environment it's in. If it's in an oxidizing environment like groundwater, it occurs as chromium-6. If it's in a reducing environment like stomach acids, organic materials, it's chromium-3. So it depends on which environment it's in and what form you'll find it. And in water, as I mentioned, we usually find it as chromium-6. And statewide, by far, the most abundant source is these natural sediments that occur. This happens to be the California state rock, serpentine, and it has elevated levels of chromium. And that's one of the reasons why we see it throughout the state, not just in our area here. Here it does occur naturally. There are isolated pockets of industrial contaminants that come from chromium, chromium ore facilities, chromium paint facilities, tanneries, and those type. But those are relatively isolated, and by far, it's naturally occurring. So this map shows the Coachella Valley, and up here in the top left corner is the pass area where the windmills occur. Down here is the Salton Sea, so it's showing the whole valley. The colored area basically refers to that part in between the mountains. It's a big bowl of sand that's filled up over hundreds of years with water, several thousand feet deep, just filled up with water. So over here in between, we have two basins. Here's the Mission Creek, and here's the Whitewater or Indio subbasin. And in between is the San Andreas Fault. So that is an important geological feature for our valley. And that is where two huge continental plates come together. Thousands of miles, each one of them, coming together at this location. So we are literally on the edge of these two continental plates. And that comes with unique geology because of that. We do find chromium-6 throughout the valley. It ranges from below detection of 1 part per billion up to just over 20 parts per billion. A part per billion is about 1 drop in a typical swimming pool. So a very minute level of the constituent. Up in the West Valley, up here in the West Valley is where we've been importing Colorado River water for 40 years and replenishing the groundwater basin. And Colorado River water has almost no detectable chromium-6. So we see the lowest levels in these areas. Here we started replenishing in 2002 with that same Colorado River water source. And then here we started in 2009 with a full-scale project in the East Valley to replenish with Colorado River water. So where we are putting Colorado River water in, we see the lowest levels. Down here is a little different. There's a little different geology, a fault system where we see arsenic. Naturally occurring arsenic occurs close to the Salton Sea, but low levels of chromium down there. So there is quite a bit of variable. As far as the colors go, the low levels are down in the blue areas, and the highest levels are in the brown and yellow. Basically, this transition area between green and yellow is about 10 parts per billion. So that area from Rancho Mirage all the way down to Thermal is the area where we're seeing levels above 10 parts per billion. Why is that important? Because the state has the first ever chromium-6 drinking water standard. First ever in the world. So California often takes a leadership role on new regulations, and this is a good example of one. The standard is set at the level of 10 parts per billion. It became effective a few months ago on July 1st. That's why we're here. So why are they regulating this? For decades, it's been known when you inhale chromium-6 in an occupational setting, like a chromium ore facility or a cement manufacturing facility, you get lung cancer. So your body, it goes into your nasal passages, it goes into your lungs. It's absorbed as chromium-6 because it's in an oxidated state. So they long knew that. But when you ingest chromium-6, it's in a reduced state because of your stomach acids. So it was long believed that it was not a carcinogen when ingested. In 2000, something very important happened. There was a blockbuster movie, Erin Brockovich. Our lawmakers and many other people saw that movie, and it was about one of those industrial chromium-6 pollutant sites up in the Central Valley area. And as a result of that movie, the lawmakers got together. Ortiz bill passed a law that requires California to adopt a chromium-6 drinking water standard within 3 years. That was in 2001. Well, the scientists have to comply with this law, but they didn't have data to set the standard because there was no health risks for ingestion of chromium-6 at that time. So they looked all over the world, looked for human data. And as often is the case, they just did not find human data that they could use to set the standard. So they turned to animal studies. Typically, rodent studies are used. And in 2008, they completed a study. You feed the rodents with the contaminant you're testing over their entire life. So it takes time to complete those studies. And you can come up here and look at after the presentation. I've got examples of the dosage and the results of the tests. But basically, the test showed that if you give the rodents massive amounts of chromium-6, you had an increased occurrence of tumors. So it is a carcinogen through ingestion based on that. So they used a precautionary assumption that there is a linear correlation between rodents that consume massive amounts of chromium-6 and humans that consume small amounts of chromium-6. So they're assuming there's a correlation, and taking the precautionary route, they are using that data to set the public health goal or the risk assessment. And that risk is to prevent potential long-term health risks. It's not an acute hazard. It's not something that has an immediate risk, but long-term, there is a potential for cancer as a result of consuming the water over a long period of time, based on the rodent data. What's the benefit? The state estimates that lowering this standard to 10 parts per billion will avoid 12 cancer cases statewide as a result of the regulation. So that is the benefit, 12 avoided cancer cases per year. So initial compliance monitoring has to be completed by January 1st, 2005. So that's currently ongoing. Each well must be tested. Each well must comply. If your first test is above the level, then you start quarterly monitoring. It's based on an annual average, your compliance, because it's not something that's an immediate risk. They look at annual average over a long period of time. Now, you probably noticed something. July 1st, it became effective. January 1st, we have to do our compliance. How do we comply? Typically, regulations come with periods of time that allows the regulated community to implement things to comply with the regulation. The federal drinking water program requires that. The Safe Drinking Water Act requires that 5 years be given for agencies to come into compliance with new regulations. This is not a federal drinking water standard. This is a California drinking water standard. So that they don't have to comply with that. So in this case, we're very frustrated with the fact that we don't have time to come into compliance with this regulation. Just to complete the environmental work and the approval process takes more than the 6 months that we've been given. So we're working with legislators. We're going to continue that. We're going to try to get a reasonable compliance time so that we can build the facilities that come into compliance with this regulation. And why? Because we need complete data. We don't want to rush decisions. We want to make sure we make good decisions that we can implement a solution that is most cost effective. We should not have to pay fines and notifications and all these costly things that come when you're out of compliance with the drinking water regulation. So that's why we're looking for legislation to give us time. It's going to take a certain amount of time anyway. We shouldn't be forced into a non-compliant situation. So here's a look at our water system. And this is basically that, again, that area from Palm Springs down to Thermal. The dots are our wells. You can see they're just scattered all throughout. So they're distributed throughout the community. We don't have a little pocket. So that makes treatment, that makes the solution a little more challenging. We have 96 active wells. About 40% of those wells, we believe, will not meet this new standard. That is the most impacted sources of any public water system in the state. So we're number one on the list. We have about 20% of our wells that are between that 8 and 10 parts per billion that we're going to be watching closely. So how do we implement a solution? Groundwater treatment, that's a very common way to do it. You can treat at individual well sites, or you can cluster the wells together and treat at larger sites. It can be cost effective one or the other way. It depends on the technology. Surface water treatment. Surface water is used by, Colorado River water is used by over 30 million people in the state of Nevada, Arizona, and California. So we have the luxury of having this important imported water supply that we can treat directly and serve to customers. We don't do that currently. But we do use that water to replenish the basin. And we saw what happens when we replenish. We benefit but from lower chromium-6 levels. We can use a combination of those treatments. And then rather than treating at the source of the water, you can also treat where the water is used. They call that point of use or point of entry treatment. However, there's some important restrictions to that. So the state determines what are the best available technologies. The two on the top are ion exchange technologies. The one on the top right is one we have implemented down in the East Valley to remove arsenic and chromium. We were the first in the country to install a facility to remove those constituents. So we have really good experience. We know what it costs. We know what it takes to comply with this rule. Down in the bottom are coagulation filtration. That's one that you'll see often at surface water treatment because it uses iron to combine with the chromium and then you remove them both together. Result in a little more sludge, but it can be cost effective at some facilities. And then reverse osmosis on the bottom right, that's the most expensive type of treatment, but it's very effective. It will remove almost anything from water, and they use it for desalinating ocean water. And while expensive, there can be ways to use that if you're treating small volumes of water. Point of use would be one of those. You probably recognize one of those units. You might see them at the warehouse stores, but those can go under your sink. They typically use reverse osmosis, which is a very tight membrane that you force the water through, and it filters out all the salts, including chromium and arsenic. Very effective. If you apply it under the sink, you're only treating 1 to 4 gallons a day that you use for ingestion and cooking. So it can be cost effective. Other states have allowed this. State of California only allows it for temporary use and only for very small systems. We'd like legislation to address that, but we thought it'd be important to look at the cost to implement that for a large system, even though the state wouldn't allow it. So we have looked at that. It is costly. So beyond the regulatory challenge, it is a costly option compared to some of the other options. So ion exchange, basically it's water passing through these tanks or vessels that are filled with these little beads. And the beads have a lot of surface area. They're positively charged, so negative ions attract to them. Negative ion like chloride from simple table salt is attracted to this. And then when other ions come that also are negatively charged, but with a greater charge, like sulfate and chromium and arsenic, it attracts to the bead and pushes off the chloride ion. So it's an exchange. So that's the simple process of ion exchange. And there are two types that we're looking at. We've been doing pilot testing. We got some national funding to look at this technology, weak-base anion exchange. And for this one, you have to reduce the pH of the water to get that reaction to occur. Then you have to raise the pH back up before it goes out into this distribution system. This one you can run for a long time, maybe a year of operation. But once you run it, you have to dispose of the resin and replace it. So there are some high costs with that process. Now the second ion exchange process is strong base anion exchange. And that's what we've implemented down in the East Valley to remove both arsenic and chromium. You'll notice a few less facilities up here. It's a schematic here. It's because we don't have to change the pH. You don't have to drop the pH down. So fewer facilities on site. But you also have to, you can regenerate this resin. So you don't have to throw it away after it's exhausted. You can regenerate it, and just by using simple table salt, you force off whatever it absorbed, and you recharge it back with the chloride ions. So one way to do that is to do it on site. It gets very complex. Or you have an off site, and Mark's going to talk a little bit more about that later. In fact, that's where we are. So I'd like to introduce Mark Johnson, our Director of Engineering, and he's going to talk about what it will take now to implement a solution.
Good morning. I have been in the water business for the last 37 years, primarily involved with engineering, some operations, across the country in Connecticut, Illinois, and for the last 10 years here at CVWD. So I've got quite a bit of experience with water treatment. So we have some compliance elements. Steve's provided you kind of the background of how we got to where we are today. I'm going to try to get into the essence of how do we comply with this new regulation by building water treatment facilities. The first bullet there is pilot testing, and Steve has been one of the premier researchers of chromium treatment studies in the United States, and we have 2 studies going on right now. And that information is going to be utilized to help us decide, you know, what is the best type of treatment to use for chromium removal. And we're also engaged about a year ago, a consulting engineer called Hazen and Sawyer, and they have been helping us analyze what are the best options for dealing with this chromium standard. So we've had a source of supply and treatment study ongoing for almost a year now. And I'll be getting into some of the results of that study in a minute. So after that has been accomplished, the next step is to develop a compliance plan. Exactly what are we going to do to comply? We also have to get together with our finance department and figure out how we're going to pay for this, because the costs, as you'll see in a minute, are pretty high. And then complete the design, the environmental work, and obtain the right-of-way necessary to construct these facilities, complete the construction, and then at the end of construction get approval from the state of California that all the facilities that we've built are A-OK. So that's the plan. And we've looked at several options, as Steve has mentioned. And this is probably one of the most complex water resource, water treatment projects that I've worked on. So we want to make sure that what we build is going to take care of the problem we have today and perhaps handle future regulations down the road. The other complicating factor is we're very lucky here at the Coachella Valley Water District that we have 3 major sources of supply. We have Colorado River supply, we have the State Water Project supply, which is exchange water using Colorado River water, and then of course our groundwater supply. So we have options to deal with this, whereas some places do not. So obviously cost is a major factor, both the capital costs and the operation and maintenance costs going forward. Operational complexity, you know, how much more staff are we going to need? Do we need folks that need special certification to operate and maintain these facilities? Operational flexibility. With multiple sources of supply, we're going to be able to adapt to different conditions. So that's why having these three major sources of supply is very important to us. Diversification. You know, perhaps using different types of treatment and different sources will be valuable in the future if, for instance, we lose one of our sources of supply temporarily. Water quality benefits. We want, as I mentioned, we want to make sure that we're in compliance with, hopefully, with future regulations as well, because U.S. EPA and the state of California have a whole list of regulations regulations that they're considering in the future for things like strontium. And we want to make sure that what we do here is not a stranded asset. And public acceptance and environmental considerations. You know, we have existing well sites, as you'll see in a minute, that we'll have to do some construction. And some of the facilities that we're going to build may have some aesthetic issues. There will be noise with the maintenance and bringing in trucks every once in a while to to take the resin away for regeneration and so forth. And then implementation complexity. We just can't go out and build these things. We have to get right-of-way. We may have to buy some land, encroachment permits from all the county and some of the cities, and also getting permits from the various state agencies to actually build these items. So there's a lot of things here to consider. It's not real easy to undertake this project. So here's a basic layout of a weak-based anion exchange facility at one of our well sites. This is an actual well site in our system. Units right here are the ion exchange vessels. They're 12-foot diameter, about 16 feet high. Actually, the existing well is located right here. So the water would flow from the well through the ion exchange vessels. This would be an aeration facility. As Steve mentioned, we have to actually raise the pH of the water after it's treated. And then it would go to a booster pumping facility and out to the system. This area here in white is the carbon dioxide facilities, which are added to the water before ion exchange to lower the pH. So as you can see, there's going to be some new facilities added to these well sites. Now we have several well sites that are about approximately a ½ acre in size. We have some that are 3/4 of an acre in size. But we feel for this type of treatment, we can utilize most of our existing well sites for this project. And here's kind of a rendering of that same well site. We've done some Photoshop work to give you a kind of a demonstration of what it might look like from the street. So the real big item you can see here is the ion exchange vessels above the wall there. Now this is a typical site plan for the strong base anion exchange. As Steve mentioned, it's a little simpler treatment. Here's the well right here. The water will come from the well into the ion exchange vessels. There'll be a little bit of pumping here, and this is just an additional electrical facility, and then it will go out to the system. So here it's a lot simpler, and you know, the majority of our well sites could absorb these additional units. And we have a rendering of what an SBA treatment facility would look like from the street. So you can just see the ion exchange vessels kind of popping up a little bit above the wall. So not too much intrusion, but a little bit of aesthetic change. And then also, of course, there's going to be more maintenance, more operation, folks coming in and out of these facilities. And as we'll see here just in a second, the strong base anion exchange treatment requires occasional regeneration of the resin. And we'll get into that in a second. For the centralized, for the strong base anion exchange resin facilities, what we're proposing to do is to remove the resin from those sites that you just saw and treat them at a centralized facility. This facility will probably be located on one of the many parcels of land that we own away from the public, out in the desert somewhere. This site here is about 5 acres in size. And essentially what we do here is treat the resin, and a brine is one of the byproducts of the treatment. So these would be brine evaporation ponds, and what remains is kind of a salty solid, and that would be eventually brought to a landfill for disposal. So the good thing about centralized regeneration is it consolidates the process. You can do it at one location. There's cost savings, redundancy, increased reliability, and it's reduced waste compared to some of our existing strong base anion exchange facilities. So for the SBA treatment, where we have to regenerate the resin periodically, we looked at a few different ways to do that. One was using trailers. These would be trailer-mounted ion exchange vessels that you would haul into a site, drop the trailer off, come back later and pick it up and replace it with another trailer. We also looked at mobile vessels, where we would actually just drop off the vessels, leave them. When they get spent, come back and replace them. And the final option, which is the one we selected, is fixed vessels, which you've seen on some of the renderings. The vessels would stay there. A truck would come in periodically, maybe every month or so, remove the resin. The same truck would have new resin and would put it into the vessel. The truck would leave and take it to the centralized regeneration facility for treatment. And that cycle just keeps repeating. So that's the option we've selected based on a whole bunch of different criteria. So that's the groundwater treatment portion of the potential solutions we have. The other key to this solution is our imported water. As I mentioned, we're very fortunate to have Colorado River water from the Coachella Canal, and also our exchange water from the State Water Project to supplement our supply here, our groundwater supply. And we use imported water for managing our groundwater supplies, either through direct replenishment or source substitution. For example, golf courses. We're trying to get a bunch of golf courses hooked up to canal water so that they don't use groundwater. That's source substitution. The two recharge facilities that Steve showed on his Chromium slide, the one at Whitewater and the one in La Quinta, the Thomas E. Levy facility, is direct recharge. And we'll talk a little bit more about a potential additional direct recharge project that we're looking at. So we have the Coachella Canal, which was constructed in the 40s and put in service in 1949. And you know, we really are fortunate that the pioneers of the Coachella Valley and the Coachella Valley Water District obtained that source of supply for us, because we have a higher priority right on the Colorado River than the state of Arizona and the state of Nevada. So it's a real strong source of water available to us for potentially solving this chromium issue. And then we've also been, we were one of the original contractors on the State Water Project going back to 1973. We started bringing, we don't have a direct connection to the State Water Project, so we have an arrangement with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California where we give them our State Water Project because they have a direct connection, and they give us Colorado River water off the Colorado River Aqueduct. So it's a nice arrangement. And it saved, well, today the estimated cost to build that direct connection is about $1 billion. So we're saving that cost by having that exchange agreement. So that's our imported water background. And, you know, here we are, California is in a huge drought. Here we are in a desert, and we're in much better shape than the rest of California, especially Central California, because of these imported water supplies that we secured years ago. So surface water treatment. How do we treat Colorado River water to potentially help us solve the chromium issue? There are many, Steve mentioned, there are many communities, cities in California, Nevada, Arizona that treat Colorado River water for domestic water use. And we've actually gone out, our team has gone out and visited several of these plants in California and Arizona just to get a flavor for, you know, how they've done it, and just to give us more background on this potential solution. So this is a map that kind of shows all the dots are the wells that will need to be treated. This is a potential surface water treatment plant in the East Valley, somewhere in La Quinta, we hope. And this is a potential surface water treatment plant in the West Valley that could be located perhaps maybe right behind us. Still preliminary information. But you can see the, this blue line here is the Coachella Canal. So it comes in nicely in the East Valley. This purple line here is our Mid-Valley pipeline that was built about 5 years ago. It takes canal water off the Coachella Canal and brings it over to the facility right behind us here. And we blend canal water with recycled wastewater. And we send that blended water out to our golf courses as a non-potable water use. So one of the things we could do is utilize the canal water that comes over here for surface water treatment for direct use for potable water. So we have lots of options, and you know, trying to figure this all out is the tough part, but we're getting there. And I'm not going to go into all the details here, but this is kind of a flow chart of how surface water treatment occurs. This is how we would probably treat Colorado River water if we did choose that option. So really, the basic process is you bring the Colorado River water into the treatment facility where we would add a series of chemicals in a rapid mix tank. And those chemicals are used to create what's called a flock. And it causes the particles in the water, the turbidity causing particles in the water to coalesce together and become bigger. And the next step is flocculation, which continually mixes the chemicals and the turbidity together, and the particles get bigger and bigger. The next step is removing those coagulated particles or flock particles in either a dissolved air flotation device or a plate settler. So what this process is doing is actually removing those particles. The next step is filtration. either granular media or membrane filtration. Granular media is simply a big box full of sand, and the water flows by gravity down through the sand, and the sand removes any remaining particles. Membrane filtration is real fine membranes, kind of like cellophane, that you force the water through the membrane using pressure. So we're still evaluating, some of these treatment techniques. Then after the water is filtered, it would go to a clear well where we would add some finishing chemicals to raise the pH, disinfect, and we go out to the system. So that's really the basic process of surface water treatment. And it doesn't matter if it's Colorado River water or Mississippi River water, the treatment process is essentially the same, just maybe slightly different units. And it's not cheap. This is a complex facility, and the costs are high to build something like this. So our proposal with surface water, and this is something that our consultant, Hazen and Sawyer, actually came up with, is not to just treat the surface water and then blend it with groundwater, but to actually combine the surface water and some of the groundwater in the treatment process. And you'll notice there, as we go through this chart, you'll see the chromium level in the Colorado River water is 0. The chromium in this example for the well water is 14 parts per billion. So in a sense, what we're doing here is treating the surface water and the groundwater to remove some of that chromium in the groundwater. So we have when you add those two together, you get 8 million gallons per day of surface water, 4 million gallons per day of groundwater. So the treatment plant itself is treating 12 million gallons per day. And the chromium at the end of that treatment process will be reduced down to 0.6 parts per billion. Now the other trick is we can bring in 8 million gallons per day of groundwater that also has a chromium level of 14 parts per billion. So we're blending it back in. And the result is a 20 MGD facility that has a chromium level of 6 parts per billion. So by treating surface water and groundwater and blending back in, we're very efficiently dealing with the chromium standard. As I said, we're looking at least 2 locations for this type of treatment. So these are some of the cost savings considerations that we've looked at in this source of supply treatment study. Split stream groundwater treatment blending, surface water blending with groundwater, and centralized regeneration. So we're not only looking at how do we deal with this situation, we're trying to look at how do we do this in the most economical way and still meet the standards. So a lot of thought has gone into these options. Another potential that we've just beginning to study as part of the solution here is what we're calling mid-valley replenishment. If you recall back at Steve's slide, up at the Whitewater area where we've been replenishing the groundwater since 1973, you saw a lot of blue. And then down in the eastern Coachella Valley, down towards the Salton Sea, you saw the Thomas E. Levy groundwater recharge facility, which just went in service in 2009, and the blue was just beginning. And in the middle is where all the orange stuff is. Well, we're thinking maybe if we did direct recharge right in the middle of our system, it might help as a dilution technique for chromium. And so that's one thing that we've added to our study. In fact, I think next week or the week after, we're going to do some test drilling in Rancho Mirage to see how that might work in the central part of our system. So that's the mid-valley replenishment option. And it's pretty simple to implement because, as you can see here, these are some photos of our recharge facilities in La Quinta. In the central part of the Coachella Valley, it's pretty much sand and gravel. So it's pretty easy to build a series of recharge ponds like this and let the water just percolate down into the ground. And this would be Colorado River water as well. So what is this stuff going to cost? We've looked at both the capital costs and the operation and maintenance costs. And you can see the capital costs range from, and here's the various options that we've looked at: clustered well treatment, individual well treatment, mid-valley surface water treatment plant with well treatment, East Valley surface water treatment plant with well treatment, point of use treatment, and then a combination of surface water treatment and well treatment. And so for all these options, you know, the capital costs range at the low end from $74 million all the way up to $183 million. And then, of course, the high end for this last option here goes all the way up to $429 million. And the reason for the wide range here is because we're at the very preliminary stages of this project, and we don't have the exact design details down to narrow in the costs. But probably more importantly is the annualized costs for these options. And this is in $1 million per year. And you can see for the 6 options, they range from $12 million per year. And for point of use treatment, you can see it starts going off the chart. And that's one of the reasons why we've taken point of use kind of off the table for a potential solution here, because for several reasons. One is the state of California doesn't allow it for large water systems yet, so we would have to get some new legislation to make it work. And then it would require an employee of the water district going out to everybody's home probably twice a year to maintain and replace under the sink units. So it's a very costly operation. So we've taken this one off the table, and we're concentrating on the remaining 5 options. And as we'll see in a minute, we're going to actually, amongst these 5 options, there are several items that are common. And those common elements involve groundwater treatment. And we have, I think, 37 wells that require treatment immediately. 19 of those wells are common treatment amongst all the 5 options. So we're going to phase the project. In phase, here's the 37 wells. Phase 1 are the common elements, including 19 wells. So we're suggesting to the public and to our board that before we figure out what some of the issues are related to surface water treatment and mid-valley recharge, we can certainly get started on the 19 wells that would receive groundwater treatment via ion exchange immediately, starting in early 2015. And while we're starting the design on those 19 wells, we would finish up trying to figure out if we're going to do surface water treatment, where, and if we're going to do groundwater recharge. And once that's completed, we would implement phase 2. So here's the timeline for dealing with all this. We talked about the pilot testing is pretty much completed. We're just about ready to submit our compliance plan to our board. We want to get your input, the public's input, before we do that. We need to get together with our finance group so that we can begin considering how we fund this. We're getting, the costs narrowed down so that they know how much they actually have to fund. We're going to start design of phase 1 probably in early January. And the design will continue on through 2017, phase 1 and phase 2. We may have to acquire some land, and we have permitting to do, after the design is complete. And then we see construction happening from maybe fall of 2015 all the way out to 2019. And then acceptance by the state at the end. So it's a long process. We're trying to do it as quickly as possible. But we want to make sure we do it right. And so there's we've got some of the top experts in the country working on this. We feel that we've really taken a really hard look at all the options and weighed everything, and we still want to take a more closer look at those issues in phase 2. So the next steps: provide the study results and public feedback to our board, probably in January. The board will determine what the compliance plan will be, develop the funding and rate impacts. And by the way, we believe, based on what we know today, that whatever final plan we implement is probably going to impact the typical residential water bill by an additional $30 to $50 per month. So the average water bill here at the Coachella Valley Water District is somewhere around $30 to $40 a month. So it's going to double. So that's an important point we wanted to bring out today. So our best estimate right now is $30 to $50 per month. We're doing public outreach. We're going to do more. We're doing this same presentation next week at 3 other locations. And then initiate the design, environmental work, and right-of-way acquisition, and begin construction. So with that, Steve and I are available for any comments, questions you might have about chromium and how we're dealing with it. Yes?
When you talk about the treatment, is it going to be treating all the water that's provided to all the users for every purpose, no matter what? Because you've got a compliance thing that talks about drinking water. So this isn't talking about just drinking water, isn't it? We're talking about all water.
Yes, it's all the water.
So our drinking water is just a very small portion of the water usage. And so, that's, did the state do any impact study on what the results of this compliance order is doing? You're doing an impact study, but did they do that when they did brought in the regulations?
Great question. You're asking, has the state looked at the cost and benefit of this regulation? And yes, they did. They did look at it, and we had a lot of input on that assessment. Their costs were nothing like what we know to be the cost. And we provided a lot of input on that. We feel we're experts on that since we were one of the first in the country to do it. And they also had a different approach on the benefits. And that 12 avoided cancer cases, they apply a value to that. In their assessment, they believe those 12 avoided cancer cases begin immediately. Well, there are lots of scientists out there that believe, well, actually, there's latency, and in order to get that benefit, it happens slowly over time, because I've been drinking the water for 53 years. So if I were to get a benefit, it'd be very small versus an infant born today. So We think they may have overestimated the benefits, underestimated the costs, but they did do their assessment, and they feel that the 10 part per billion level balance the costs and benefits relatively well. So that's they did do the assessment, to answer your question, and they believe even though the costs are high, statewide, they have to look at it from a statewide perspective, not just a one water system. We have the most impacted water sources because of the type of system we operate, the size of our area, and we depend on a lot of groundwater. So our perspective is a little different than maybe the city of LA, which might have 3 wells impacted for 3 million people. So their costs are going to be very low to adapt. So they look at it from a statewide perspective, not just for the Coachella Valley.
And your point about we're treating all the water, you're correct. We looked at point of use. I personally, I was hoping that would be the winner, but the operation and maintenance costs, the annualized costs are just out of sight. So that's why we discarded that option.
Is there any indication that some technology would be able to help in doing the point of use thing and making it more practical, for example, using computers to report on the quality of water that's being provided or being supplied in each house, and doing other things like refinement of filters and things like that that would be lasting for longer periods. In terms of reporting the compliance, the technology might be helpful in only servicing those positions that would need it. For example, it might impact quite a bit in terms of the cost. And the idea is that I think we're getting ahead of our own technology in this, all this enactment. But is there any chance that technology will help us in that? And are we prepared to be able to use that?
Yes, so the question is technology improving to where point of use and point of entry might be a more economically feasible technology to implement? I served on a national committee that looked at just that issue for the arsenic compliance rule. We had to install some facilities here. There are hundreds of water systems across the country that are still not complying with that rule that was enacted 13 years ago. So they're looking at what is an affordable alternative. Point of use, for the small systems, you're just treating the water that you're drinking. The technology is there. It's very effective. The hurdle is the oversight. The state currently, has a good feel for that and confidence for regulating a public water system at the well or the surface water treatment plant that goes out to all the customers. They don't have as much comfort on those individual devices in every one of the homes. So they're requiring every device to be tested every year, far beyond what we have to do at our source water treatment. We don't have to do that at our well. We don't have to treat all of our customers or test all of our customers. So the costs, that right there, just analytical costs, is one of the reasons why that cost was so high. So should we be able to do representative monitoring? It's the same device treating the same water in all the homes. So other states have done that. They've allowed representative monitoring. You don't have to test everyone. You test a reasonable representation. So the state needs to have greater comfort in that being a suitable option. And we may be getting close to the tipping point. The state is now moving into regulating naturally occurring elements that occur in water. They had previously focused on the industrial, the pollutants, the pesticides, and those other things. Well, they've got those things pretty well under control. Now the system is still there. They're still paid to write regulations. So they're turning their attention more on naturally occurring things. We saw that with the arsenic, chromium. The next one might be strontium, another naturally occurring element. So if we're going to regulate water in these minute levels, things that occur naturally in it, we may have to look at it differently. The community may not have enough resources to continually install treatment plant after treatment plant. These treatment facilities will not treat for strontium. That would require a whole different treatment system. So that point of use system using reverse osmosis removes everything that I can see on the radar for future drinking water regulation. So we are getting some traction at the state. In fact, they are doing a point of use, point of entry regulatory package is being developed. Trying to get more information on that. We think what it's going to do is put into effect a permanent acceptance of the temporary emergency regulation that they have right now that allows up to 200 homes to use point of use for 3 years until you install your central treatment. Well, are we going to pay to install units to use them for 3 years and then go to central? So you're paying twice. I mean, it's really not effective. Other states have embraced point of use, mostly for small water systems, as an effective alternative for long-term compliance with new drinking water regulations. So, you know, we're going to continue to watch that, but it is a culture shift for the regulators. And right now, we're not there, but they're telling us we have to comply with this rule now. So we've got to make some important decisions based on what the law is.
Doesn't the same thing occur for us in the big scale as it is for that point of view in the small scale? For example, if they change the regulation and we strontium, we built all these plants to, to meet this certain condition, and now they change the thing, so now we'll have to build all different plants again. Probably that would be insane, and they would come to their senses at that point, surely.
Great question, and one of the problems with that cost-benefit assessment that they're required to do, they don't have to take into account any other regulation that they do. They just deal with it on a regulation by regulation approach. Is this regulation, what is the cost benefit of it? What are the costs and what are the benefits? It's additive. And so at some point you get to a place where you can't afford. It's the community resources. So I think we may be heading in that direction to where that may trigger a shift in how they look. But currently, that's how they do it. A regulation by regulation.
We have a question.
Yeah, it seems to me that there's two different issues being addressed in this overall project. The first one is compliance with the Chromium-6 regulations. And from your presentation, my understanding is that the phase 1 of this project, which is the treatment of all those 56 wells combined, will take care of those regulations and they will be in compliance. Is that correct?
Well, we have 37 wells that we believe are out of compliance. And we intend to treat or deal with all 37 wells. But we've determined that there are 19 wells that are common between all the 6 options we looked at. And they would require some type of groundwater treatment, ion exchange treatment. So we're going to be recommending to our board that we start on those first 19 immediately as we continue to analyze how we deal with the other 18. And that would become the next phase, phase 2. But our intent is to deal with all of them, all 37 over the next 5 years, whatever the time frame it takes to get it done efficiently.
Well, when that work is complete, we'll be in compliance with the Chromium-6 regulations.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So the other issue that is also being addressed in this overall project is the water supply or groundwater overdraft, which takes a totally different approach, a totally different cost, and it has really no relationship, direct relationship to compliance with the Chromium-6 regulations. But that's looking more at the long-term water supply deficit that we are facing?
Okay, I think I know where you're going. The phase 1 does not put us in compliance with all the 37 wells. So the phase 2 is an important part. Until we complete both phases, we would not comply. So the question is, on phase 2, those other 18 wells, should we just do groundwater treatment on those? Should we do a mix of surface water and groundwater? Or should we do mostly all surface water? So that's what we're looking at to determine for those other half of those wells that we're probably going to have to do something about. That's where surface water comes into play for that. That's where those decisions will need to be made before we can ultimately say we're in compliance. And I might add that we're currently not out of compliance. So we've started our compliance monitoring. Compliance is based on an annual average. So that monitoring is going to continue into 2015. So we're currently in compliance. But based on preliminary monitoring, we think we have this number of wells, 37 possibly, that may not meet that rule once we complete our compliance monitoring.
But let me just clarify. To be in compliance in all the different wells that are not, all of them, the individual treatment, the ion exchange for individual well treatment will put the district in compliance.
If we were to do phase 1 and phase 2, and the decision on phase 2 was groundwater treatment, yes.
What you're saying is that the groundwater, the introduction of groundwater is necessary to comply with the Chromium-6 regulations?
Introduction of groundwater.
The introduction of groundwater, the introduction of surface water to comply with the regulations, is it necessary to bring surface water into play?
It's not necessary, but it's an option. And we want to make sure we look at all the options.
So,
Not an option directly related to compliance with Chromium-6. We could comply with Chromium-6 regulations by the individual well treatment.
yes, and that would be the option 2 there on the list. So we could do just groundwater treatment on the well. And that would be phase 1 and phase 2. The phase 2 part would be only groundwater treatment, no surface water. So there's lots of options there. So you're right, we can just do groundwater treatment and be in compliance. That's an option. Now, we don't increase our diversification. We don't improve our groundwater management picture. So, there's pros and cons. But there's costs that come with that additional diversification, the additional benefit to our groundwater basin by taking off some of the demand on our groundwater. So that's what we're weighing.
The other thing also, we have a 35-year water management plan, which is available on our website. And that plan calls for treating Colorado River water for domestic use, to meet demand and balancing our our water source of water supply situation in the future. So another benefit of doing using surface water treatment to deal with this issue today is that we're incorporating a component of our water management plan, probably earlier than we need to, but it's going to have to be done at some point in time anyway.
Yeah, and I think my question was really a follow-on to kind of what you guys are talking about. And I know you've been looking for all kinds of ways to reduce the cost of this program. Did the idea of the overdraft situation and the potential for, and I don't know exactly what your overdraft is and how that would be satisfied in the future, but is there a situation where some of the wells are going to need to be abandoned anyway? Did you guys have to look at whether wells would have to be abandoned just from the hydraulics of the overdraft as an option?
Well, yeah. Well, we recently did an update to our water management plan, kind of a status report. because it was updated in 2010, published in 2012. This past May 2014, we did kind of a status report on where are we at. Because a lot of things have changed. The population projections that were used in that study haven't come to fruition, and several other variables. But that status report says that if we continue with all of our programs, now this is exclusive of the issue we're talking about today, the overdraft situation would be resolved in 2021. So all these water resource programs we have in place are working, and we believe our overdraft situation in the Coachella Valley will be stabilized in 2021. Now, we've tried to incorporate some of the elements of our water management plan in this study, as I just mentioned. But as far as hydraulic, so we don't feel that the wells will need to be abandoned due to hydraulic issues, because stabilization is coming. Yeah.
And now for the options that use more surface water, we will be able to turn off some wells, and they'll be available as if growth occurs. They could be used to meet future growth, but we wouldn't need them if we're the more surface water that we use.
I know you don't want to give up the wells, obviously, none of us want to lose that supply.
Yeah.
So but there are situations like Fresno where they were forced out because it was so critical. They were forced out of their wells.
One of the nice options of the surface water, combined surface water groundwater treatment plant option that we're still studying in phase 2 is that if you lose one of those sources, either one, you can still function. And not a lot of places have that. So that's why it's, it might be a little more costly, but it's going to provide us a lot of reliability and flexibility down the road. And that's why we want to really, really look at this stuff, because we have these three options. Good questions, very good questions, and we appreciate your input. And Peter Nelson, also one of our board members, has joined us just after we started. So they heard, your input, and we're going to be summarizing this for the rest of the board members. So we really appreciate your coming and helping us. And I think Ashley has
a little message for
you
here.
Yeah.
Yes, we've got some comment cards here in the back. If you haven't got a chance to pick one up, I'll go ahead and pass them around. We've also got a water quality interest list. If you sign up for this, you'll receive emails sporadically about different updates that we have. And all of this information, including today's presentation, will be available on the web. So if you have friends that weren't able to make it, or family, you can tell them to go to cvwd.org/cr6, and the PowerPoint will also be available. So please do take a moment to fill out these comment cards. We'd really love to have your feedback.
And the renderings, the drawings of the well sites are in the back. We got the map back there also, and we've got the some of the science stuff up front. If you have any questions, you want to look at that information.
Thank you.